atop the Aubrey Plaza in beautiful downtown Wilmington, Delaware. We are the Podcast Pediatricians.
I'm Rob Walter.
And I'm Matt Gotthold. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and a whole bunch of other places, as well as podcastpediatricians.com. Welcome back to a brand new Podcast Pediatricians. Finally, we're back.
Finally. Oh, my God. So much has happened since we both did an episode together. Matt lost the cords for the audio.
Hey.
I don't know. Now you have it, so I don't know.
Well, I try to put it in the same place every time.
Traumatic. And I did put out a mini episode in August from Hot Topics Disney about obesity and the debate of GLP-1 medications versus surgery. We really missed you on that one, Matt.
I'll bet you did.
And since then, so much more about treating obesity, including multiple studies, again, showing how cost-effective and successful bariatric surgery can be. But now the GLP-1s are becoming more affordable, and probably next year a pill form will be approved that may change everything. So I do think in the future, we in primary care may be prescribing, even in pediatrics, GLP-1s. What about you, Maddie?
I'm really not sure that I'm there yet. I do have a kid that we're considering for Wegovy. He has had some significant enough mental health issues, seemingly largely tied to how he feels about his body habitus. And so after multiple hospitalizations, this is really a thing for him.
Right.
Uh-huh.
It probably has MSLD,
Yes.
the fatty liver. When you say you're considering Wegovy, are you considering prescribing it yourself?
Yes.
Or, I haven't made that leap yet.
One of the providers in my practice has prescribed it for specifically that reason, a really extreme case of depression and anxiety. So it's not like we're doing it a lot. I mean, my case would probably be the second of all the kids in our practice.
Right.
But we're starting to flirt with the idea the same way that we did over years, kind of come to grips with, hey, listen, we actually can competently prescribe ADHD medicines. We can competently prescribe GI medications that were previously strictly the realm of a gastroenterologist, right?
Exactly. We weren't in the late 90s when we started this,
Right.
doing fluoxetine and some of the ADHD meds. There's a debate that we've gone too far, or not
Right.
us particularly, but
Right.
the world goes too much with that. But
Right.
we're cognizant of that too.
On another front, in this episode, we can't even begin to cover what's going on with the vaccine situation in America involving so many different players. The CDC, the ACIP, the AAP, and of course, RFK Jr. We simply ask that families follow the American Academy of Pediatrics vaccination and care guidelines. These recommendations are deeply researched and validated
For
through
years.
not just years, decades, right?
Yes.
Decades of rigorous, high-end research and monitoring, not anecdotes about somebody's third cousin. As most of our listeners probably already know, there are measles outbreaks in multiple states. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and South Carolina with smaller
now
clusters.
South Carolina.
Yes, South Carolina. I mean, it's coming north here, gang.
Yes.
So, this whole it's not my problem. Infectious disease doesn't care. It doesn't
Right.
care where you live. It doesn't care who you associate with, right?
And you get below the 93 to 95% threshold, it's like dry kindling.
Absolutely.
And it gets those unvaccinated, but also will get some people who are vaccinated.
Yeah.
And so we're all in it together. So it's just maddening.
As of this morning, 1,958 reported cases of measles in the U.S. in the past year, with 49 outbreaks. In the prior year, last year, where people are already being a little bit wonky about getting the vaccine, there were 285 confirmed cases and 16 outbreaks. So from 285 to 1,958 within the span of 1 year. Right,
and then about 1 in 1,000 death rate, and pneumonia, brain issues, and then the SSPE 5 or 6 years later, and it's 100% fatal. I mean, we're going so backwards.
And it's just it's crazy that when the folks who are making these changes are put to the test of what is their reasoning, there seems to be no valid scientific argument.
No.
Right? It's just kind of code words and aluminum and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Well, we covered the aluminum thing about 20 years ago,
Right.
in depth in terms of its involvement. Does it sound like it should be something that may cause a problem? Well, it's a metal. So what happened? It was investigated to the nth degree,
Right.
and there's no problem with it, right?
Same as autism. It was investigated.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Anyway, so even diphtheria, which is an extremely deadly disease for children that had not been seen in the U.S. since 1997, and not been felt to be, and it felt to have been actually eradicated in this country, is threatening to return to the U.S.
Yep.
And threaten our population again. So the current RFK CDC is recommending that no hepatitis B vaccine be given at the time of birth unless a mother is a known hepatitis B carrier. I think that's the recommendation, right?
Right, and they're saying that it's a discussion. So first of all, it was never mandated that every baby got it. We always had some people who opted out. It was never mandated, but that was the routine. And now they don't want it to make a routine, just have a discussion. Yeah. And we're seeing an uptick on more and more kids who are not getting it, and this saved, almost 20,000 kids a year from getting chronic hepatitis B.
This institution,
it's a complete success story.
The recommendation for routine hepatitis B vaccination at birth has been part of our conscientious pediatric care since Rob and I were in our training over 30 years ago. Yeah, and has proven to be very effective in decreasing the incidence of hepatitis B in children in the U.S.
And the cancer and the liver failure.
Oh my
and the
gosh,
cirrhosis.
Absolutely. So and as Rob mentioned, this has prevented approximately 20,000 infants in the U.S. from developing chronic hepatitis B infection and liver failure, like Rob said, and even a high incidence of causing liver carcinoma
every year.
God,
20,000.
Anyway, so luckily our hospitals are still offering it, but the RFK CDC's new recommendation has spurred more vaccine refusal and added so much associated distrust in what we have been following in terms of legitimate, scientifically proven protocols in pediatrics that some parents are refusing even routine vitamin K shots for their newborns. So some infants are vitamin K deficient at birth, and without the vitamin K shot, those infants are 80 times more likely to develop bleeding in their brains within a short period of time after birth.
I want to say to parents now, brain bleed.
Yes.
Okay? That's what you're risking. It's, again, depressing, maddening. And getting back to the flu, as we discussed in the past, the CDC gets data from all over the world about different strains emerging to help decide what we should put in our vaccines, especially from the southern hemisphere. But it's been reported that this year, many countries around the world are not sending that data to us. Perhaps because we pulled out of the World Health Organization in January of 2025, and we're not supporting a lot of other international health research, or even research in the U.S. has been funded so much less. These past came out, the AAP had all these amazing studies. They're just stopping funding of them. Not because there's any problem with it, they're just because they don't agree with the AAP. They also just announced, and this really hit me, they're dismantling the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado that was founded back in 1960 to make us, the United States, the world leader in climate science and weather prediction. And look how much crazy weather is going on and hurting people and kids and displaced and killed so many. And now we're getting rid of the greatest thing that we put together to try to prevent that. Back to the flu, it will be rough this year. It's an H3N2 strain, and there's a mutated strain called subclade A that's dominating. And it's going to be a lot worse than last year.
We're already seeing quite a bit of it, right? And the evidence, at least that I've been able to glean from what's been published so far, is that even though the flu vaccine isn't a direct hit on this subclade A, the people who have suffered from it and who were immunized seem to be suffering much less from it. And that's kind of like the strategy every year with the flu vaccine, right?
Exactly, right. And I should have mentioned this other thing. Karen Raven, our local ID chief at the recent Wilmington RY Warren meeting, talked about, which I'd seen a little bit about, this recent MMWR report about this pediatric influenza-associated encephalopathy, and including the most severely necrotizing form. 192 kids in the U.S. averaging 5 years of age, and 19% of the less severe form died, but 41% of the necrotizing form died. Only 16% of those kids had the flu. So on top of everything else, we've got this brain syndrome with influenza.
It can be pretty awkward walking in the room and, saying like, so were we getting the flu vaccine this year, right?
Right.
So I've recently asked my my medical assistants to say, so before we get started, Dr. Gotthold would like to know if you intend to get the flu vaccine, if you're not going to get the flu vaccine, or if you would like to talk about it.
Right, that's good. So I don't do that, but I do have a note if they've declined it in the past.
Oh, yes.
So I know going in. And I'm not going to torture everybody, including myself. No. I'll just say, listen, last year you didn't get it. It's supposed to be much more severe this year. And if there's risk factors, and then I'll if they say nope, I'm like, okay, we'll go on.
Yep.
Right?
And my usual counter to that is like, hey, listen, we have it in the office.
Yeah.
It usually takes about 2 weeks to work.
Right.
So if suddenly it seems like there's a big problem in the community and you may want to reconsider, we've got it.
You just call us, right? And we talked about last year, kids under 5 with high fever and cough should be tested for the flu. And for gosh sakes, give them antiviral medication if they have influenza because they're at higher risk, and we should use all the tools in our toolbox. And we're doing a nice debate on that at Hot Topics Disney World in July at the newly refurbished Grand Floridian from July 16th to 18th. So if you're out there, think about going. And if you want to hear some of the best talks at Hot Topics over the years, you can subscribe to Audio Digest. And they have a pediatric session with many of these great talks. They'll do that again this July. I have a big commute from Philly now, so I enjoy keeping up pediatrics and these great lectures and earning a little CME to boot.
There you go. Nice Hot Topics plug there, Bobby.
Thank you.
But there is, after all that dismal news, there is some good news out there. So the data from the newer RSV vaccination for pregnant women in the 3rd trimester and the administration of the long-acting immunoglobulin for newborns and infants up till 8 months old during RSV season over the past 2 years has been stunningly effective in terms of how the prevention of severe RSV in young infants has evolved. So we're hoping that studies will be done soon, which will compare the two approaches, either giving it to the moms or having the babies get it within the first 8 months if they are
in the season.
In season, exactly. Man, I keep stumbling over that. Sometimes it's tricky during the office newborn visit to figure out if the infant's mom got the vaccine from the OBs, and the hospital newborn notes are sometimes not as accurate as we'd like.
Have you seen that? They just say, Mom not got it, and then I'm in the room, and they're like, yeah, I got it.
Yeah. It's so...
So today, we're going to go over some cool highlights of a talk about food allergies and FPIES and EoE from the recent ROI Warren seminar here in Delaware. My 27th straight year running it, kind of crazy. I guess I'm getting old, but not as old as Matt, who did not attend. But I am giving Matt a pass on attending because it was just days after coming off the high of watching his wonderful daughter get married, his second daughter giving her way in marriage. It was a beautiful wedding, and I was feeling very privileged to be there.
Oh man, we were fortunate to have you there, Rob, and it was absolutely one of the most meaningful days of my life. Her new husband Steven is really one of the best men I've ever met in my life, and so we're thrilled to have him in the family.
Yes, Steve was great there, and he's working for Purdue Athletics, so I got to talk Big Ten sports with him. Great guy.
Yeah, he's actually the rehab director for Purdue's football team, who is Big Ten, but kind of like always on the
they're not
always the easy win for Notre Dame.
Let's just say Northwestern beat them this
year.
Yes, so what does that
yeah,
say?
Rob's alma mater.
And I have to say, I thought your toast a few years ago with Victoria's wedding, we hit it out of the park. But then this year, you topped it, and less is more. You stood up in front of all your friends and family, raised your glass, and you just said 6-7. I mean, I almost cried. Now, it's such an old thing, 6-7. It's so stupid and it's so overdone. But I figured we hadn't even mentioned it here. And I sometimes will. I mean, you have a 5 or 6 year old or 7-year-old, and you just make the hand motion with it when things are getting kind of like slow in the room, and they start laughing.
See, I'm not a teacher, so I love it because I don't hear it that much.
Right,
my daughter, who's a kindergarten teacher, hears it all the time. But I love a brilliant thing that means nothing.
Right.
It's like a Seinfeld show. Right. This really means nothing. Right. Let's make you think it means something. Right.
Right.
Oh yeah. And Rob, you've had some new news in the family, man. You're like Pawpaw or Grandpa or Peepaw. I forget what you want to be called. Pappy, maybe.
No. Just Grandpa. Yes, Noah arrived around Halloween, and it is really cool when you fall in love with these little babies. The first moment you see him. What a high. Going to the hospital. It was actually a hospital in D.C. I used to moonlit at Sibley. And then, feeling so great, I got home, and then my son-in-law texted me a picture of little Noah dressed head to toe in Washington Commanders gear.
Oh, yikes.
I know.
Is he your former son-in-law
I know.
Or at least is he like missing in a...
Seriously, I got that.
Missing person?
I jumped in my car, went to Rally House, and I got him an Eagles onesie and a Super Bowl cap. And it's going to be like one of those stories you hear about grandparents who secretly take their grandchild to church to get them baptized so their souls can go to heaven and not limbo.
Absolutely.
So I am going to get him in all Eagles gear and get some documented pictures. to save his football soul. And then there was the Commanders-Eagles game last night.
Oh, yeah. Finally
crushing.
a little. I mean,
little.
they demonstrated at least a little bit of offensive prowess, right?
Yes. You got a little fight.
Got everybody
feisty.
involved.
Yes.
Yep.
All right, so ready? Just the final cheer. Ready? Go.
EAGLES, Eagles!
We'll see what happens. I just found out you did too. I went to the Thanksgiving Day massacre, the day after Thanksgiving against the Bears, which was horrible.
Had it marked as an easy win at the beginning of the season.
I know. I lived in Chicago 10 years. They won again last night. I lived in Chicago 10 years. That 85 team, the greatest team, a single season team I've ever seen, and got to take care as a resident of Jim McMahon and Refrigerator Perry's kids.
Wow.
So I have a soft spot in my heart. But yeah, I wanted the Bears to go down. So it was rough.
It was the one game I got to go to with my son Justin, and we just kind of both sat there slack-jawed, like, when are they going to actually do something? This is awful.
It was awful.
All right, but then again, how about our Phillies, right? Another heartbreaker. What a promising year, and then they go down in flames against the hated Dodgers. I thought the Phillies were doomed when all the baseball experts picked them to win the World Series, which is always like the kiss of death, right? I'm still hoping that Nola will get back to himself. I mean, I still think he has it in there.
I hope.
And that Zach Wheeler will be in Cy Young form
After his surgery.
And we'll try winning the World Series again next year.
Without Castellanos, thank the Lord.
Yay.
But, that may be the equivalent of us magically hoping that Joel Embiid's knees will be fine and the Sixers will play for a title. Kind of unlikely. Hit us with a disclaimer, Matt.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to put the final nail in the coffin of I think the process is over. Right?
Done.
All right. So just to remind you, and this is our disclaimer, we are sharing our own personal opinions on pediatric care. Always talk with your own pediatric caregiver about your child. Pediatric caregivers should always consult expert guidelines and consider their own community standards of care.
Okay, so today we're going to give you highlights of just one talk from the meeting on food allergies, but also just want to give you a quick pearl from a second talk by Rob Heinle, star pulmonologist, about asthma. As always, any errors in these discussions about these talks are on us, never on them.
All right, so I think that all of us in the trenches are aware that the guidelines for asthma care puts inhaled steroids front and center, and in the last several years, experts encourage combination inhaled steroids with rapid onset long-acting beta agonist albuterol, LABAs, like formoterol. So, budesonide formoterol, which is generic Symbicort, is often preferred over combinations with other slower onset LABA, salmeterol, also known as Advair, since it also can be used as a rescue inhaler. No more carrying two inhalers.
Right.
More and more, the guidelines are indicating that this is fine, even for kids under 12, like in the 6 to 11-year-old range. Are you doing this, Rob?
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. I am. I rarely ever use a single steroid fluticasone inhaler much unless it's for the younger kids. But the big pearl I took away from what he said is you can use this inhaler as a rescue and as a maintenance. But just remember, you need to put a total limit on the total amount of puffs per day. So for a younger kid under 12, the limit should be around 8 puffs a day. If you're already giving them 2 puffs twice a day, that's only 4 more puffs they can get during the day. And for older, 12 and above, he said like limit of 10 to 12 puffs per day total. So you do this so you don't get too much and get side effects from too much long-acting albuterol and no systemic side effects from too much steroids in the long-acting steroid part. You can also use this pre-exercise. But he usually says just use 1 puff instead of the 2 puffs for EIA, exercise-induced asthma. So I'm starting to put these in my pharmacy prescriptions about total a day and how you can use it for EIA.
Smart.
Yeah.
And I forget, maybe you can remind me, do those inhalers have counters on them?
They do.
Oh, they do. So there you go. You can mark where you're starting that day and know that you've only used it up to, the amount of times that are appropriate for your for your child. Right?
Hopefully. I also wanted to mention a remarkable series in the New England Journal of Medicine by Lisa Rosenbaum about the state of primary care medicine in the United States and how we may be witnessing the slow death of primary care, especially on the adult side. But the same issues are seen in pediatrics.
Yes, we talked many times over the years about choosing convenience over quality with adult-oriented urgent care and telemedicine. But we've seen a big uptick in our patients going to urgent care centers instead of to us, even though we happen to be open at that time, with same-day visits. And that's the family's choice. but I don't necessarily feel inclined to discuss what the urgent care did in detail by phone with the parents after the urgent care visit when we were open blocks away from the same appointments.
Amen.
Right?
And we're open the weekends too. So, and the other thing is, I'm reading all these testimonials from doctors and nurse practitioners and PAs who work in these urgent care centers. And they're told to be more liberal with antibiotics and oral steroids by corporate owners because that's what makes the customers happy. It's not good medicine, but it's good patient satisfaction scores for them.
Yeah.
Ms. Rosenbaum really highlights that many of our healthcare system decisions, with private equity fueling it, are about maximizing revenue through hospitalizations and specialty referrals and testing, which makes it bad for business to have a good primary care doctor who can avoid a lot of unnecessary tests and admissions and medications with good preventative care. And this problem is really hitting the adult primary care, family medicine, and internists even more than in pediatrics. And that's why concierge medicine has taken hold, especially with adults. And I don't blame some of these docs trying to get away from 12-hour days with endless EMR and prior auths. But when the more and more good docs go into concierge, it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks the pool of good primary care doctors for everyone else. That's why it's hard to find a primary care doc.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's almost impossible in Delaware these days to find a primary care doc. But the other aspect of this, I think, that is at least worth chatting about is the fact that many doctors these days work for large hospital systems. And the large hospital systems honestly don't care how they get the money. They just want the money. So the same ones who employ the primary care doctors are also the same ones who are encouraging the primary care doctors to see the blood pressure checks and the cholesterol checks and send all of their sick people to urgent care,
Right.
which they also own. Right?
Right.
And so it's win-win right down the line for folks. I think I told you, Rob, that my partner Jason said that a nurse practitioner mom was in the office the other day. She works for one of the urgent care centers. And in an 8-hour shift, she had seen 80 patients. That's 10 patients an hour.
Wow.
Right? So it really is about move them on through.
Yep.
Get their debit card. See
Yep.
you later, alligator. Right? So it's really disheartening. I mean, especially in my situation where I think we've mentioned this, but my son's in medical school now, right? And it's hard to give him any guidance in terms of what aspect of medicine could suit him, especially when I come from a world where primary care has been so satisfying. I think you're there too,
Right.
And you're right. Is this the death knell? Right. So many practices, especially with private equity involved, have pivoted to centralized triaging, often off-site, or even out of the country.
Right.
So you can never call and simply talk to your practice nurse or doc or NP or PA or get satisfying answers with no same day or even same week appointments. That's why over a quarter of young adults turn to chatbots for advice. And the biggest reason given for chatbots is that they listen and are actually more empathetic than the primary care offices are, which we've discussed before.
Right. And please note that none of these podcasts are AI generated. This podcast is 100% human written and artisanally crafted.
I liked that part.
But a physician buddy of mine did turn me on to using the Open Evidence app to look up information. It's all evidence-based and gives you the sources like New England Journal of Medicine. And I'm using it more and more. And sometimes even in the room, if a parent asks me a question, like I had someone say, when does my baby start to see color? And I'm like, 2, 3, 4 months. But they said, let's look together. So I opened up my app and we looked together. The answer was 4 months. And we're not Luddites, and we'll take advantage of AI when it's helpful. But it's a slippery slope. And some medical systems, like in Massachusetts, are now using chatbots to initially field patient questions. And then they have off-site, usually out-of-state physicians backing those chatbots up with a telemedicine visit. And they say it's to enhance primary care. But it's hard to believe that it won't be a slippery slope more and more to replace primary care and have the chatbots refer directly to ERs, urgent care, and specialists.
Yeah, and Rob, I think we try to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, are we just kind of sentimental old guys, or used to a certain system? And I try to call myself out on that. And in fact, I'll even encourage my patients when they say, like, hey, listen, how do you feel about me looking something up on ChatGPT? I'm like, that will generate the source of our conversation. Like, I don't discourage you from that.
Right.
It's going to let you know what's out there.
I got to keep ahead of them. It is true.
Absolutely,
it is true.
right?
Like, you know what? I gotta keep ahead.
And maybe that forms a more cooperative situation with your patients. Again, what we have to offer that maybe in urgent care or some other place doesn't, which is like, we know each other.
Right.
Like, let's work together on this, right?
Right.
Primary care is looking even worse, as I mentioned with my son, for graduating, for those who are graduating from medical school eventually. Ms. Rosenbaum gave an example of a medical school dean who was advising a new doctor who was determined to become a primary care physician in an underserved population, that she was way too smart for primary care. I don't know what that says about us, Rob.
Right? I think what it says about that dean. I just says he shouldn't be a dean. That's what I think.
Yes. We all know primary care makes the least amount of money, although, again, much more than the average American. But it also carries a lot of training debt. And the offer interviewed many primary care docs who shared that when they took a look at their colleagues in dermatology and ophthalmology, and they look at their $500,000 in debt from medical school, like, am I stupid?
Right. She mentioned, she said, am I the idiot here?
Right.
People said, am I the idiot here? And we both still love it. We have no qualms about our choice. But it's really worrisome to look at the landscape down the line. And both of our practices recently bought into an umbrella group of mostly pediatricians who take over HR and IT and provide EMR and billing, but can allow us to do our own thing in our own sandboxes. And we both like to be as fiercely independent as possible. But I don't know about you, but I always tell people the main reason we did it is that we can negotiate with insurance companies.
Right.
For years and years, while costs went up and the big hospital systems were getting paid more with cost of living raises, we were stagnant. Like for an ear infection, they were getting more.
Actually.
And so we had to do something. And now we have some powers and numbers to negotiate our contracts. And luckily, we have primary care physicians like Matt's partner and fellow book club member, Jason, who fight for primary care at the state level to be fairly compensated compared to specialists in the hospitals and the ERs, or else we will not be training excellent primary caregivers for tomorrow. In the big picture, we need to increase the total amount spent on primary care to be more than the ridiculously low 4% that we have now. And hospital systems know the big money, the way the system's been rigged, is in hospitalizations, procedures, and big pharma. And they'll always follow the money. All right. Get off my soapbox, Maddie. And after the break, we'll touch on the whole breadth of pediatric adverse food reactions.
One more fun fact. Okay, so for every dollar spent on primary care, $10 are saved in the medical healthcare system.
Nice.
We are back. Okay, a little dive into the fascinating world of immunologic food disorders and adverse food reactions. A superb talk was given by Dr. Michelle Squadrito, who is part of an excellent community private practice allergy group here in Delaware. Dr. Squadrito did her allergy fellowship training at Nemours, where her research centered on allergenic foods and penicillin allergies.
Penicillin allergy. All right, Matt, I'm going to ask you again. Are you doing any amoxicillin delabeling? He's choking on this now. Are you doing any amoxicillin delabeling in your office yet?
It's another void in my I need to do this.
You do so many things that I don't do, especially psychiatric care, but you don't do
Well,
this.
thanks for getting me on that one, but anyway.
So I got to get to the program. So it's really satisfying, and it can reduce the use of ceftonir, also known as Omnicef, which is just not great for your microbiome and in curing infectious diseases. I heard one person describe ceftonir as tastes great, less killing.
I think only people our age are going to get that joke,
I know, but
right?
I don't care.
Was that Miller Lite?
Miller Lite.
Yeah.
Yes,
Tastes great, less filling.
Yeah.
So Dr. Squadrito really broke up adverse food reactions into immune-mediated and non-immune-mediated. The latter including lactose deficiency and foods with toxins like scromboid plus gluten sensitivity, but we are going to concentrate on the immune-mediated ones. First, the classic IgE-mediated food allergies. The big 9.
The big 9.
By the way, I did count these. Rob writes these things, so when he said 9, I wanted to make sure there were 9 here. The big 9 being milk, eggs, wheat, soy, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, and sesame. IgE-mediated type 1 food hypersensitivity affects almost 6% of children under the age of 18, but milk, egg, wheat, and soy allergies usually resolve with time. Essentially, they grow out of them.
Right. On the other hand, peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, and sesame tend to be more persistent. And remember, peanuts are not really nuts. They're legumes. Tree nuts are a bit different. An allergy to one tree nut does not often mean an allergy to all of them. Cashews and pistachios go together as sister nuts. I love that term. As do walnuts and pecans. They're sister nuts. While almonds... Wait
a minute. Are sister wives sister nuts?
I knew you'd say that. So almonds, hazelnuts, and Brazil nuts stand on their own. Coconuts are not nuts, and she gets asked that a lot. So deep dive. Maddie, have you ever had a Brazil nut?
I have indeed.
Really? I had
not. They're those big honking ones that look like somebody's knuckle.
They're grown in the Amazon. Bolivia is the biggest exporter, not really Brazil.
Well, thank God it's not Venezuela, or it would be out of luck.
And right. Oh, God, don't. Yeah. And the only other people that are eating them besides you, Matt, are people in England.
Nice.
They wildly love their Brazil nuts. So for shellfish allergies, which more often than the others start in adulthood, crustaceans like shrimp, crab, lobster are much more allergenic than mollusks like clams, mussels, oysters, scallops, and octopus.
By the way, stop right there.
Yes.
I was not convinced that octopuses, were mollusks, because they didn't have a shell.
And
I looked it up at 3 different sources because, that's how I am.
Yes.
They are indeed mollusks.
Yes.
Yeah. How about that?
Thank you for that. So there can be a lot of cross-reactivity between shellfish, but sometimes not. Sometimes you're just allergic to snow crabs and nothing else. So testing can be very helpful. And as we mentioned a few years ago, it's interesting that studies show that the worst food allergies likely start with exposure through the skin or inhaling it, not by ingesting it, which is why kids with severe eczema have a higher rate of food allergies because their skin is compromised. So you want to get these kids exposed to allergenic foods early and desensitized before it touches their skin, and you want to keep their eczema under excellent control when they're young. A child suspected to have a true food allergy needs to see a good pediatric allergist. We shouldn't be mucking around with blood tests for food allergens.
Testing for food allergies can be by skin prick or by IgE blood tests or office food challenges. But even if the skin prick is positive, it doesn't necessarily mean they are allergic. It just means they're sensitized, and there is a difference. However, a negative skin prick test is very reliable to say that you are not allergic. But again, a positive skin test has a low positive predicted value. Same thing with IgE tests for specific foods. They are probably even less helpful than the skin prick test, and even if these allergy tests are positive and there is a food allergy, they in no way predict how severe the reaction will be. High IgE numbers do not really mean anything in terms of severity, and for all these reasons, there's no reason for us to ever do routine food allergy testing and going down a rabbit hole to get a lot of positives and then end up restricting diet for no good reason, which can cause more food allergies in the long run, plus malnutrition. And please do not forget that all of the IgG food tests and panels are total crap.
Total crap. If you have a definite peanut allergy, you can get these component blood tests, and if the ARA H1 and 2 are positive, that will probably be a lifelong severe reaction. Whereas if it's an ARA H8 or BET V2 that's positive, it's likely less severe, more of a cross reaction with birch allergy. So for a kid with a peanut allergy, it's nice to know that. There's also a myth that each time one gets exposed to an allergenic food, the reactions become more and more severe each time. That is not true.
So obviously, Rob and I remember in our careers, prior to 2010, we were taught to delay cow's milk until 1 year of age, eggs until 2, peanuts, tree nuts, fish until 3, and then updated that theory in 2010 to say that we should not delay out allergic foods beyond 4 to 6 months. But old habits die hard. We were still delaying a lot of peanuts until that famous LEAP, that's LEAP study, in 2015 showed that early introduction of peanut-containing foods led to an 86% reduction in subsequent peanut allergy. And recently, it's been all over the national media that peanut allergies in the U.S. are way down with early peanut introduction. For a little while, and we talked about this in one of our first podcasts, if you have a child with severe eczema or egg allergy, that you should get IgE or skin prick tests to peanuts before you introduce peanuts. But this was a nightmare.
It was a nightmare.
And so in 2021, the recommendation was taken away. And since that time, there's no need to ever do any testing before you introduce any foods. And the introduction can be quick. I mean, some people say as soon as just 1 day for a food to be trialed.
One new food a day.
Mm-hmm.
Another myth is that breastfeeding mothers should stop eating foods to which their child is allergic. That is just not true. Breast milk contains less than 1% protein and is very rare for breast milk to cause a food allergy reaction. Breast milk contains other components that make allergenic proteins more tolerable for babies. So in most cases, mom can continue to breastfeed while eating foods to which their child is allergic. Again, in most cases of suspected true food allergy, we want to get them to see a good pediatric allergist like Dr. Squadrito and prescribe them epinephrine in the meantime. But I did ask her about a specific situation we all see. And Matt, you see this, right? It's a 9-month-old who comes in. And the parent tells you, well, when they're around 6 months, we gave peanut products or egg. There's a rash around their mouth, not hives. About 30, 60 minutes later, everything else was fine. So they just never gave them that food again. What should we do? What should we do with that history?
Right.
Should they get epinephrine right away and have them wait to see an allergist, who can take a while? And the answer I heard her say is that there are some situations like this that you can then give that child an antihistamine or have it ready, put Vaseline around their lips so you're kind of
creating a barrier.
Right, so you won't misdiagnose just a contact dermatitis, and then try the food again. We don't recommend you doing this in the hospital ER parking lot, which is a common thing. But if there's a lot of parental anxiety or other high-risk issues like other food allergies certainly, or significant eczema or wheezing, then certainly, send that kid to the allergist at 9 months and go ahead and give the epinephrine. And that's my opinion. Actual food challenges, if you think there's a high risk, really is an art. It's time-consuming. There's strict protocols. It should be left to the allergists. And usually the allergists have the family bring their food to the challenge.
And remember, epinephrine is the only treatment for anaphylaxis. There's a myth that epinephrine is dangerous and should be only given if someone's throat is closing up, but that's absolutely not true. And if the child is in anaphylaxis, even if they are under 33 pounds, you can give the 0.3 dose, which is the higher dose. There's no minimum age for epinephrine for anaphylaxis.
And do not forget, the new kid in the block is Neffy, the nasal epinephrine given like intranasal Narcan. It's needle-free, has a shelf life up to 30 months instead of 12 months, and a temperature tolerance of over 120 degrees. So if you leave it in a hot car, it's still okay. It's approved only for 4 and above and 33 pounds and above. Insurance can be a barrier. I will sometimes write in it's for needle aversion or exposure to high ambient temperatures to see if those could be magic words to get it covered. And you know what, Matt? I got free Neffy in my office because they consider me an allergist. You know why? Because I do amoxicillin delabeling. So I have this pretty cool nasal epinephrine in my office now,
You are so
Maddie.
special, man.
I know.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
So antihistamines, which we've talked a lot about on this podcast, are considered second-line treatments for food reactions and are supportive, but they definitely will not treat anaphylaxis. And steroids seem to have no clear evidence of help with anaphylaxis. And remember, as we said before, the old first-generation diphenhydramine antihistamine, meaning Benadryl, and its generics are completely inferior to the new second-generation antihistamines like cetirizine, which is Zyrtec, and loratadine, which is Claritin. Since their onset is slower, meaning the diphenhydramine, they do not act as long, and they have many more side effects. And unfortunately, a lot of schools do not stock the second-generation antihistamines, and that's frustrating. Again, the usual dose is 1 milligram per year of life until about 8, and then the full 10 milligrams. If there are severe reactions, and we talked about this in a prior episode, like chronic urticaria, you can go up to 4 times the usual dose. That's how safe these medications are. So in an older person, they can get 20 milligrams twice a day of cetirizine, whereas the normal dose is 10 milligrams a day.
Right.
Okay?
And then, and this is my favorite part of the talk, she described 2 really interesting food allergic syndromes. The first one was food-dependent exercise-induced anaphylaxis, or FPIES. I had never heard of this. Had you heard of this?
Nope.
It is when you get anaphylaxis at least 4 hours after consuming the food culprit, which is usually wheat or shellfish or nuts, but it's only triggered if you exercise within 30 to 120 minutes after the ingestion of that food. The symptoms range from mild skin reactions to severe systemic anaphylaxis, and severity can vary by how much of the food you ate and then how much exercise you do. It's thought to be that exercise increases the gut permeability for these foods, proteins, to get in your system, which decreases the threshold for the food reaction. It's sometimes worse if there's also an NSAID ingested, if you had an Advil, or if you had some alcohol like you might have with a meal, or depending on your menstrual cycle, or when it's higher temperatures. Some people call this midnight anaphylaxis because it can occur hours after the ingestion of the food, maybe after a late dinner and a late workout. And so you have to think about it and put together that the ingestion could have been hours early and ask about the exercise. I had never seen this. Maybe I never recognized this. You can do skin prick testing for suspected foods, do provocative challenge of the foods, but then you have to exercise them. So you have to like give them the food and put them on a treadmill if you're still unsure if that's what's causing it. The treatment is to avoid that culprit food at least 4 hours before and 1 hour after exercise, and always carry epinephrine and always exercise with a buddy. That's crazy, right?
Well, it'd be crazy for you to have to find a buddy. All right, so
come exercise with me, Matt. Come exercise.
Yeah, fat chance. So that's kooky, right? But
Right.
maybe that's not as crazy to me as the alpha-gal syndrome, which is a tick-borne condition that shows itself 1 to 6 months after being bitten by the lone star tick. It's an IgE-mediated allergic reaction with delayed onset of anaphylaxis 2 to 6 hours after someone has ingested the meat of a mammal, so mammalian meat. It is the only known allergy that's triggered by a sugar, so it's a carbohydrate,
Right.
as opposed to a protein, right? And that is the alpha-gal sugar that is found in meat, so it's not a protein. Interestingly enough, it mostly happens in adults with either type A or type O blood types. What type do you have, bud?
I'm A positive.
Me too.
Uh-oh.
Oh, dude, awesome. I can use you next time I'm going to have an organ replaced. All right. So being type B or AB seems to be protective and cause immune intolerance.
They're doing brain transplants?
Nice. Monkeys and humans do not have alpha-gal sugars in their muscles, and neither does Rob. But all other mammals do. So it can affect only monkeys and humans.
Isn't that crazy?
How about that, right? I first read about this being in Texas, but now it's much more often found on the East Coast, especially in the Cape Cod region, and is even at the Jersey Shore now, since Rob moved there. And yes, in Delaware. It's a huge issue in Martha's Vineyard, where vegetarian restaurants have popped up because people cannot have meat. I'm sure that's not the only reason that the vegetarian popped up there. It's somewhat self-limited and will go away over years, but it's very scary and frustrating for those affected. The treatment is avoidance of mammalian meats like beef and pork and lamb, and caution with other parts like marrow and even the gelatin. It's oftentimes used in fancy restaurants or can be used as fillers for foods, and even vaccines. And certain medications like cetuximab.
And obviously, the biggest way is just don't get tick bites, and that's what we in the Lyme area that we've had our whole careers. We know that. Certainly, they know that in the Cape Cod area, but it's a lone star tick. But she also touched base about non-systemic Ig-mediated pollen food allergy syndrome, what we always called oral allergy syndrome, which we have talked about before. It's this tingling, itchiness, and swelling around the mouth with ingestion of certain raw and lightly cooked plant-based foods like fruits and vegetables and nuts. People with birch allergies will cross-react with apples, peaches, plums, pears, cherries, apricots, almonds, and veggies like carrots and celery and parsley. Those with fall ragweed allergies can cross-react with cantaloupe, honeydew, watermelon, zucchini, and cucumber. All of this can be much worse if you're on a protein pump inhibitor. I didn't know that. So if you're taking...
Why is that, Rob?
I don't know. I should know, but I don't know. Heating denatures the proteins. That's why you can have these when they're cooked but not raw, or you get this local reaction. Systemic reactions like anaphylaxis are extremely rare, and the management is really avoidance of these raw foods. If you do have birch and ragweed allergies and get allergy shots, it'll help the allergies. It'll also help having this food protein reaction. Sometimes you do prescribe epinephrine if there is a history, rarely, of systemic reactions, or if they have other risk factors like being on chronic protein pump inhibitors for reflux.
What about actual treatments for food allergies? So there are the newer daily immunotherapy type of medications like Palforzia, which is FDA approved for ages 4 through 17 for peanut allergies and works by desensitizing them in about 60 to 80% of the patients, but is absolutely not a cure, and it involves taking a small amount of peanut protein every day to increase the threshold for reaction. It can be very time-intensive to do this. They must still carry an EpiPen and read all the labels to avoid peanut ingestion, and it does make it more difficult later to be able to test accurately for peanut allergy.
And last year we discussed omalizumab, or Xolair injections, every 2 to 4 weeks, which can treat any IgE-mediated food allergy disorder and also used for asthma, and has shown striking results for reducing the rate of reactions. It's particularly good for someone who has many true food allergies, and it makes their life miserable. Again, it's not curative. You still need to carry epinephrine, but newer studies are being done to perhaps combine that with oral immunotherapy to get closer and closer to the holy grail of curing food allergies. So lastly, she talked about eosinophilic GI disorders. And make no mistake, is a very challenging, difficult chronic disease, and less than 1% of people outgrow it. Have you seen any with this?
I've seen a few, and I always wonder if I'm missing some.
Right. It's hard to predict which children with this condition will have a milder course, even lifelong, and which will have more significant effects, including fibrosis, stenosis, especially of the esophagus. But it does seem to have a worse outcome if it takes you a long time to diagnose it and start the treatment, which is on us to think about it. Early diagnosis does help. It's an immune-mediated mix of IgE and IgG, and seems to be increasing in prevalence to about 1 per 1,000 people. The median age of onset is 5, so it's pediatricians who should be seeing this. And we're all seeing this more as you look at the data in pediatrics. A lot of these kids have comorbid food allergies and allergic rhinitis and eczema and asthma. The presentation can be abdominal pain, dysphagia, nausea, emesis, often acting like GE reflux that is unresponsive to the usual members. Sometimes there's diarrhea, bloody stools, and failure to thrive. A specific hallmark, especially when you get older, can be chest pain and specifically dysphagia, especially having more difficulty swallowing solids more than liquids. Swallowing issues is seen more when diagnosed in the later years, but sometimes that can be just from years of inflammation before you start the treatment. It can affect the stomach, eosinophilic gastritis, the bowel, eosinophilic enteritis, and the colon, eosinophilic colitis. But the major type we see is eosinophilic esophagitis. And just in my head, I just think of the kid with reflux who just is really bad or not getting better, or the kid who starts to say he has dysphagia and swallowing issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a question when we see an older kid, and certainly 5, as you said, is kind of a key number here-ish, but who suddenly starts having reflux symptoms, who hadn't for a while longer. Like, there's really no developmental reason that should be happening. Right. So, but diagnosis can only be made by actually doing an endoscopy and a biopsy, and looking for increased eosinophils in the mucosa, the lining of those parts of the body. These kids don't always have a peripheral eosinophilia, which means we can't really do a blood test and say like, oh, look, your eosinophils are up.
Right. There's no marker.
Yeah. Eosinophils are traditionally the type of white blood cells that are indicative of either allergy or, come on, Robbie, parasitic infection,
Oh,
right?
yes.
So, in any event, it's classified as a mixed IgE and non-IgE condition with chronic eosinophilic inflammation in the mucosa, but the IgE-mediated allergy is not a direct cause. As mentioned, this condition is really complicated. It's thought to be caused by antigen exposure, so it's proteins, in most cases except for the mammal sugar, right?
Right.
Antigen exposure to the GI tract tissue. But food allergy testing is not helpful. Milk and wheat, which are so commonly ingested, are the most common offending food antigens, but it could be lots of other foods too. One approach that has a 40 to 70% response rate, boy, that seems pretty broad, doesn't it?
Right.
But is very difficult, is trying to remove the affecting antigen by food elimination. So this requires one of two things. It either requires single food elimination trials, so you eliminate a single food, with repeated biopsying.
Right, endoscopy
Good
and biopsy.
God,
Yes,
that's right.
yes.
If there is a change after many weeks, or the other option is multi-food elimination, which can basically mean putting a child on a very basic amino acid-based diet and then seeing if the eosinophilia resolves, and then trying to slowly add foods back in one by one. So this is really onerous, right?
Yep.
I mean, sometimes you hear about people getting G-tubes because for older children and adults, they just can't tolerate taking this elemental diet treatment long term.
I always think of like we all have samples of amino acid
Right.
formula. Like taking that is there's no
Ooh,
way.
right.
Another approach is protein pump inhibitors, which have a 30 to 50% response rate due to an anti-inflammatory effect. It's really not for the reflux, but there are downsides to being on chronic protein pump inhibitors, and this approach is not curative. There is a podcast called Cribsiders. Have you heard of it? It's really good. It's out of Brown, and they did a really good podcast about this, and it just reinforced how complicated, difficult it is to treat, especially with no biomarkers and all these scopes you have to do. There are nasal endoscopy that you can do that is quicker. They can put it through the nose, not a lot of anesthesia. So that often can be something that can make it a little bit easier to do. It's still a lot. And they do mention that adult practitioners may just put them on protein pump inhibitors, and we'll get to like swallowing liquid steroids, and don't do repeated scopes and just watch. And if they start to get strictures of the esophagus, they just dilate them every 5 years or so.
Yikes.
But the pediatric expert on the podcast said, as a pediatric specialist, that is not very satisfying to be doing strictures on a young kid.
We're about prevention, right?
And the other therapy, as mentioned, is squirting your regular inhaler, like for asthma, like fluticasone, into your mouth, and then swallowing that concoction of steroids to coat the esophagus. So it's kind of like how we tell people not to use inhalers.
Yes.
That's how we want them to use it for this. We don't want them to breathe it in. And there are also new biologics like dupilumab, which is used for eczema and has been approved for EoE as young as 1 year of age. It could take up to 6 months to show any effect. And I have a couple of older teens with this and the PPIs and the swallowed spraying of the fluticasone. But it's still very frustrating, especially continuing to have that feeling of swallowing problems.
It is such a tough condition to treat, but it is manageable. And with expert treatment, you shouldn't have to alter to a tremendous extent the quality of somebody's life. I mean, clearly this affects a big part of how people routinely do things, but it can be addressed and somebody can have a normalized life as a consequence. So let's briefly talk about eczema and food allergies. Eczema is a genetic condition. It is not at all from foods. And if some of the folks with eczema avoid certain foods, they are more likely to get a food allergy. We don't like to do food allergy testing just because of eczema unless there is a really, really good other reason. And the only way to tell if the food truly is a trigger is to eliminate it for 4 to 6 weeks and then give an oral challenge. The problem is that people do this on their own, and they start limiting more and more, and these kids already have eczema, and they're now becoming malnourished. If this is to be considered at all with eczema, it should be done by a pediatric allergist.
Okay, we finished with some non-IgE immune conditions. And let's start with something that we see pretty often as pediatricians. It is a food protein inflammation, but a lot of us will just call this milk or soy protein intolerance of young babies. And they're happy babies, and they're growing fine, but the chief complaint is there's some streaks of blood in the stool. But they usually look fine, but not always. They don't always look fine, but usually fine. And the blood freaks everybody out. It's a poorly understood condition. We're not talking about colic, which, again, we're not sure what that is. We've talked about that before, but, crying. But these kids usually just have blood in their stool, but they otherwise look fine. And if they're breastfeeding, you try to eliminate the cow milk and soy in the mother's diet. And if they're formula fed, you go to a hydrolyzed formula like Nutramigen, Progestamil, and they usually outgrow this. So later in infancy, you can then reintroduce milk and soy, and they're fine. You see kids like this, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, and just to clarify, kind of at least in my mind, how this works is we just said a little while ago that a mom does not have to change, her diet for breastfeeding for routine food allergy. Again, this is different, right?
Exactly. This is different.
So in this situation, there is some protein that gets in the mom's breast milk, and if indeed it's from usually either cow's milk protein or soy protein, that can continue to affect the baby, right? So at points we do ask the breastfeeding moms where this is the presumed diagnosis for the baby to change their diets for the time being.
Right. So the breastfeeding part, because that one was with a true IgE mediated, that it doesn't, that they could still doing it. This is more of a reaction to the protein.
A localized reaction.
Exactly. It's confusing though.
It's really confusing.
But these kids usually look fine, although I had someone recently who I thought had this, but was getting more cranky, not gaining weight, and so it seemed to be more than that, and they're seeing GI. But then there is, lastly, the FPIES, food protein-induced enterocolitis syndrome, much more significant onset. I had not really seen this very much, but I have a few patients with this. How about you?
Yeah, I've certainly had people affected to the point where they needed to be hospitalized for this. Not many, a handful over the years. So it's a fascinating condition, very poorly understood, as we've said. Affects children more than adults, and we have a typical onset in early infancy, a week up to 4 weeks after the introduction of that culprit food, whether it be milk or soy or oat or rice, but even eggs, peanuts, avocados even, which are considered broadly by many people to be kind of a super safe food.
Right. Bananas,
seafood, and even sometimes multiple triggers. So it presents with repetitive and profuse and protracted vomiting 1 to 4 hours after that food's ingested. And sometimes there's associated watery diarrhea. It's no wonder that this is usually diagnosed as an acute gastroenteritis. So this looks like a stomach bug, right? More than a food reaction. One of the biggest kind of hallmarks of this condition is that the child seems to be extremely lethargic, sometimes even pale, and can even be hypotensive. And everything, all the symptoms really resolve within 24 hours, and there are no skin findings, and there are no respiratory symptoms.
Yeah, so basically, unless they end up like an ER and really, really lethargic, you have to think about it by the history when they keep getting recurrent bouts of what we would say is a viral gastritis. And if they're going to 3 different urgent care centers and having these, it's hard that someone's going to put this together. There's no test for it. And acutely, the treatment is supportive. Oral rehydration, generic Zofran, sometimes IV resuscitation, sometimes even steroids if it's severe.
Yeah. Long-term management is to avoid the trigger food and then have oral food challenges with an allergist, when you're looking to reintroduce that food. Most kids outgrow the problem. About 28% will outgrow it by the time they're 2, 53% by the time they're 3, 64% by 4, and 72% by 5 years old. This can vary by foods. So soy is oftentimes outgrown by 12 months, but grains and milk can take up to 3 years, and as we just said, even longer, and other solids, 4+ years. Part of this is cell-mediated response, so you want strict avoidance of the trigger food. But if somehow a mistake is made and the child gets that food again, it can add another 3 years to the duration of this before it resolves.
That blew me
it's
away.
Really it's just really a weird condition.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's a subset of chronic FPIES, which can be progressive with watery diarrhea and failure to thrive, and is triggered by repeated ingestion of culprit food over days to weeks, like giving formula over and over again that the child is sensitive to. So that's why thinking about it and diagnosing it can be so important.
Okay, Matty Ice, that's all we've got for the boys and girls. And everyone out there, please remember to take your flu shots. And remember, the more kids who get their flu shots, the fewer grandparents like me die from the flu. Pappy, say goodnight, Matt.
By the way, I extricate myself from this boys and girls thing that Rob seems so fond of. Good
Ladies
night.
and
Good night,
gentlemen.
everybody. There you go.
Good
Ladies
night.
and James.
Podcast Pediatricians Productions. All rights reserved.